Tula is a city with a special destiny in Russian history. For centuries, weapons for the defense of the fatherland were forged here. Founded in 1525, the Tula arms plant had transformed into a powerful industrial complex by the early 1940s. On the eve of the war, major enterprises operated in the city. The arms, cartridge, and machine-building plants, where thousands of highly skilled workers, heirs to the glorious traditions of Tula craftsmen, labored. In the pre-war years, Tula industry was undergoing a period of modernization. Mosin rifles, Nagant revolvers, Maxim machine guns were produced here, and the production of the latest models of small arms was being mastered. The city lived a tense working life, but the peaceful sky was already being overcast by the clouds of the approaching war. On June 22, 1941, the alarming news of Germany's attack stirred Tula. Rallies were held at the factories. Hundreds of Tula residents lined up at military enlistment offices. The city began to adapt to a wartime footing. Enterprises switched to round-the-clock operation, increasing the output of weapons and ammunition. When Hitler approved the plan to attack the Soviet Union, Tula was not marked as a primary target. However, as the war progressed, its strategic value became increasingly obvious to the German command. By the autumn of '41, after the failure of the Blitzkrieg, the capture of Russia's arms capital became one of the key objectives on the Eastern Front. In late September '41, the Wehrmacht launched Operation Typhoon, a general offensive against Moscow. Within this plan, Tula was assigned a special role. The city lay on the shortest path to the capital from the south and represented a crucial transportation hub, through which railway and highway arteries connected the country's center with its southern regions. The German command viewed Tula as the last serious line of defense before Moscow from the southern direction. By capturing the city, Guderian's tank divisions would have been able to advance unimpeded to the capital, threatening to encircle the entire Moscow grouping of Soviet troops. Tula's industrial potential was also of immense importance to the Germans. Hitler personally emphasized the importance of capturing the arms factories. According to German intelligence, up to 30% of all small arms of the Red Army were produced in the city. Control over these enterprises would not only deprive Soviet troops of a significant portion of their arms supplies, but also allow the use of production facilities for the needs of the Wehrmacht. In the directives of the German command, Tula appeared as Russian Essen, by analogy with the German center of military industry. The capture of the city was intended to strike a crushing blow to the defensive capabilities of the Soviet Union, and simultaneously become a powerful propaganda trump card. For the assault on Tula, the 2nd Panzer Army, under the command of Colonel General Guderian, one of the most experienced and successful tank commanders of the Wehrmacht, was allocated. The German command expected to take the city with a rapid, on-the-march strike, using tactics successfully applied in the capture of other Soviet cities. After the fall of Orel and Bryansk, the Germans were confident that Tula would not be able to offer serious resistance. In his memoirs, Guderian wrote that he planned to capture the city in 2 or 3 days and immediately continue the offensive on Moscow. However, history decreed otherwise. When the enemy approached Tula, the city was already preparing for defense. On October 23, 1941, the Tula City Defense Committee made a historic decision to form the Tula Workers' Regiment. Its foundation was laid by workers from the arms, cartridge, machine building, and other factories. People accustomed to holding not only tools but also weapons, which they themselves created. Within a few days, over 2,000 people had enlisted in the regiment. Captain Anatoly Gorshkov, a career military officer with combat experience, was appointed commander. But the core of the regiment consisted precisely of workers, hereditary gunsmiths, metallurgists, mechanics. Many of them were elderly, had a deferment from conscription as valuable specialists, but voluntarily joined the ranks of their native city's defenders. Parallel to the regiment's formation, a large-scale industrial restructuring was underway. The Tula arms plant, even under the threat of capture and bombing, continued to produce. Some of the equipment was evacuated to the eastern regions of the country, but the main workshops continued to operate. Production was reprofiled to manufacture the most essential items for defense: rifles, submachine guns, anti-tank rifles. Workers toiled for 12 to 16 hours a day. Many of them stood at machines during the day, and at night went out to build fortifications or took up combat duty. Women and teenagers replaced the men who had gone to the regiment, quickly mastering complex production operations. Vasily Zhavoronkov, the first secretary of the Tula Regional Committee, played a special role in organizing the defense. Under his leadership, a system of interaction was created between military units, the Workers' Regiment, and the city's enterprises. Gunsmiths received specific assignments for repairing damaged weapons and producing ammunition, which were immediately sent to the front line. Under the conditions of the approaching front, Tula factories mastered the production of previously unmanufactured types of weaponry. The cartridge factory established the production of hand grenades, and the machine-building factory produced anti-tank hedgehogs and bottles with incendiary mixture. Engineers and technologists developed new types of ammunition adapted to urban combat conditions. When German tanks approached the city's outskirts, Tula's defenders already represented an organized force. The Workers' Regiment took up positions in the southern part of the city, covering the approaches to the arms factory. The unity of the front and rear in Tula became not just a slogan. It was a reality where the line between combat operations and production sometimes blurred. October 1941 transformed Tula into a fortress city. When it became clear that German troops had broken through the defenses on the approaches to the city, feverish work began to create defensive structures. The people of Tula understood. Every anti-tank ditch, every barricade, was a chance to stop Guderian's armored armada. 3 lines of defense were hastily created around the city. The first ran 5 to 7 kilometers from the city limits, the second along the outskirts, the third directly on the streets. Anti-tank ditches up to 3 meters deep and up to 6 meters wide encircled Tula in a semicircle from the south and southwest. It was from there that the main enemy offensive was expected. The entire city participated in the construction of fortifications. Up to 20,000 people, women, teenagers, elderly men, went to work daily. They worked in any weather, often under bombings and artillery shellings. By the end of October, about 50 kilometers of anti-tank ditches and escarps had been dug around Tula. Barricades grew on the city's streets. They were built from sandbags, logs, tramcars, and machines from evacuated factories. Special attention was paid to intersections and squares, places convenient for tank maneuvers. Here, barricades reached the height of a 3-story building and were reinforced with metal structures. Tula gunsmiths showed ingenuity in creating anti-tank obstacles. Metal hedgehogs, weighing up to 300 kilograms, capable of stopping a medium tank, were manufactured at factories. Firing points with embrasures for machine guns and anti-tank rifles were equipped in the basements of houses. The city's defense strategy was based on the principle of multi-layering. Each quarter became a separate resistance node. Buildings were adapted for all-round defense. Loopholes were punched in the walls. Underground passages were laid between houses. Observation posts and sniper positions were installed on the roofs. Particular attention was paid to the southern approaches to the city, the Oryol and Voronezh highways. The main anti-tank weapons were concentrated here: artillery batteries, anti-tank rifles, Molotov cocktails. Camouflaged guns capable of direct fire at enemy tanks were installed at intersections. Military engineers and experienced commanders actively participated in creating the defense system. They trained the civilian population in the basics of fortification and anti-tank tactics. In a matter of days, thousands of Tula residents mastered the skills of building fortifications and anti-tank defense. By October 29th, when German tanks reached the approaches to the city, Tula was a well-fortified defensive area. Every street, every house was ready to meet the enemy with fire. The gunsmith city turned into a fortress city, ready to repel Guderian's steel machines. In the last days of October 1941, Guderian's tank group, having broken through Oryol and Mtsensk, rapidly advanced towards Tula. After the capture of Oryol on October 6th, German tank divisions launched an offensive to the northeast. Mtsensk fell on October 11, despite fierce resistance from Katukov's tank brigade, which for the first time used the tactic of tank ambushes against German armored units. On October 23, German troops captured Chern, and on October 25, Plavsk, located just 50 kilometers from Tula. The pace of the offensive was up to 30 kilometers per day. It seemed that nothing could stop Guderian's armored fist. The situation on the approaches to Tula became critical. General Ermakov's 50th Army, defending the approaches to the city, suffered heavy losses and retreated under the pressure of superior enemy forces. Many units were scattered. Communication between them was disrupted. The army headquarters had no accurate data on the position of its troops and the enemy. On October 29, advanced units of the German 4th Panzer Division reached the southern outskirts of Tula. An enemy reconnaissance battalion appeared on the Oryol Highway 5 kilometers from the city. German aviation intensified bombardments. The railway junction, arms and ammunition factories were subjected to systematic raids. At this critical moment, the defense of the city was taken over by the Tula Workers' Regiment under the command of Captain Gorshkov and a combined NKVD detachment under the command of Senior Lieutenant Zubkov. It was these units, consisting mainly of civilians and internal troops, that took the first blow of the Wehrmacht tank units. On October 30th, at 5 in the morning, German intelligence attempted to penetrate the city from the direction of the Oryol Highway. The reconnaissance patrol was met with fire from the fighters of the Workers' Regiment, who occupied positions near the Rogozhinsky settlement. A battle ensued, during which the enemy was repulsed. At 7 in the morning of the same day, the Germans began an artillery bombardment of the southern outskirts of Tula. Following the artillery preparation, tanks and motorized infantry went on the offensive. A column of 30 tanks and armored personnel carriers with infantry moved along the Oryol Highway. This was the vanguard of the 4th Panzer Division, which had the task of breaking into the city on the move. A fierce battle unfolded on the outskirts of Tula. German tanks, which had not met serious resistance all the way from Oryol, unexpectedly encountered an organized defense. Anti-tank rifles, artillery, and Molotov cocktails stopped the advance of enemy armored vehicles. October 30, 1941, marked the day of the first serious trial for the defenders of Tula. At 6 in the morning, German artillery opened a hurricane fire on the southern outskirts of the city. Shells exploded on the Oryol Highway, in the area of Rogozhinsky settlement, and along the railway tracks. The artillery preparation lasted about half an hour, after which tanks went on the attack. A column of 30 tanks and armored personnel carriers with infantry moved along the Oryol Highway. The Germans were confident of quick success. After all, until this moment they had not encountered serious resistance on the way from Oryol to Tula. Guderian expected to take the city on the move, with one swift blow. But on the outskirts of Tula, German tanks were met with a squall of fire. Artillerymen of the Tula Workers' Regiment and soldiers of the 156th NKVD Regiment opened aimed fire from anti-tank guns. Crews of 45mm cannons fired direct shots at the leading vehicles, trying to create a jam on the narrow section of the highway. When the German tanks approached a distance of 100 to 200 meters, anti-tank rifle crews entered the battle. The armor piercers aimed at the most vulnerable spots of the German vehicles: sides, tracks, observation slots. Several tanks froze with broken tracks. 2 more caught fire after hits to the engine compartments. German infantry, following the tanks, came under crossfire from machine guns installed on barricades and in the windows of buildings. The attack faltered. The Germans retreated, leaving several damaged vehicles and dozens of killed soldiers on the battlefield. Around 10 in the morning, the enemy made a second attempt to break into the city. This time, the Germans attacked simultaneously from 2 directions, along the Oriol and Voronezh highways. About 50 tanks went on the attack, supported by motorized infantry. German planes struck at the positions of the city's defenders. At a critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to the city center, the last reserve came into action. Volunteer workers with Molotov cocktails. Groups of 3 to 5 people approached German vehicles from the flanks and threw bottles at them. Several tanks flared up like torches. Grigory Volnyansky, a worker at an arms factory, particularly distinguished himself in this battle. Under heavy fire, he approached a German medium tank and threw 3 Molotov cocktails one after another. The tank caught fire, and the crew that jumped out of it was destroyed by accurate fire from Soviet sharpshooters. By the evening of October 30th, the Germans ceased their attacks, having lost 17 tanks and up to 200 soldiers and officers. The first assault on Tula was repelled. Guderian, for the first time, faced a situation where his tank units could not break through the defense of a Soviet city on the move. In his diary, the German general wrote, "The attempt to capture Tula on the move failed. The enemy offers stubborn resistance, using anti-tank artillery and Molotov cocktails. The city is well prepared for defense." As German tanks approached the outskirts of Tula, the city's arms factories were already operating under a special regime. As early as mid-October 1941, partial evacuation of equipment to the Urals and Siberia began. But the city and enterprise leadership decided that the main production facilities should remain in Tula and continue arms manufacturing until the last possible moment. The arms factory, with over 200 years of history, transformed into a veritable fortress. Barricades were erected around the enterprise grounds, anti-aircraft machine guns were mounted on workshop roofs, and bomb shelters were equipped in basements. All the while, production never stopped for a minute. Work shifts were extended to 12 to 16 hours. Many armaments workers did not leave the factory for weeks, sleeping right by their machines. Women and teenagers replaced the men who had gone to the front, quickly mastering complex technological operations. Production veterans, some over 60, returned to the machines to pass on their experience to the youth. When regular bombardments began, the factory reorganized its work. The most valuable equipment was moved to basements and bomb shelters. There, in the dim light of kerosene lamps and makeshift electric lanterns, the assembly of rifles, submachine guns, and machine guns continued. Workshops were disaggregated, creating autonomous production sections so that a bomb hitting one would not halt the entire process. The cartridge factory also continued operations under bombardment. Here, they established the production of not only standard cartridges, but also special ones, armor-piercing and incendiary, especially effective against tanks. When there was an acute need for hand grenades, factory engineers developed a simplified production technology within days, and soon, thousands of grenades were rolling off the conveyor daily. A special page in the history of defense was written by Tula's armaments inventor engineers. When it became clear that standard anti-tank rifles were not reaching the front in sufficient numbers, a group of designers led by Nikolai Korovikov developed a simplified PTR model in the shortest possible time, which could be produced on existing equipment. These rifles, unofficially named Tula rifles, played an important role in repelling tank attacks. Production did not cease even during direct battles for the city. Workers, finishing their shifts, received weapons and ammunition they themselves had manufactured and went to the front line. A unique situation arose. In the morning, a person stood at a machine, and in the evening, they repelled enemy attacks with the weapon they had made. During the most fierce battles, when German tanks broke through to the factory outskirts, workers formed extermination groups. Armed with anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails, they advanced to meet the enemy vehicles. Many of these people had never held a weapon except during factory tests, but their knowledge of technical specifics made them formidable adversaries for German tank crews. The siege of Tula transformed the daily lives of its citizens into a constant struggle for survival. Under the whistle of shells and the roar of bombings, the people of Tula did not merely exist. They continued to live and work, turning the entire city into a single fighting organism. Each morning began with an anxious anticipation. Where would German tanks break through today? Which districts would be shelled? Would there be enough bread for everyone? Food supply in the besieged city became one of the most challenging tasks. Bread rations were reduced to a minimum. Workers received 400 grams, employees 200, children and dependents 150. City authorities organized special canteens where hot food could be obtained, usually a soup made from a meager set of ingredients. Suburban collective farms, not yet occupied by the Germans, delivered vegetables and milk to the city under the cover of night, risking shelling. Despite the proximity of the front, hospitals continued to operate in Tula. They were housed in schools, clubs, and administrative buildings. There were so many wounded that beds were placed in corridors and basements. Medical staff worked around the clock, often by candlelight and kerosene lamps when electricity was cut off due to bombings. Many surgeons performed 20 to 30 operations a day, without leaving the operating table. Yesterday's schoolgirls and female students worked as nurses in the hospitals. They not only cared for the wounded, but also donated blood, and in critical moments took up arms, defending their patients. There is a known case where nurses from Hospital No. 1, armed with rifles and grenades, repelled an attempt by a German reconnaissance unit to infiltrate the building. The city's utility services worked at their limit. Repair crews for the water utility and power grid went out to fix breakdowns under fire. When German bombs damaged the city's water supply, a team of plumbers, led by foreman Ivan Kuznetsov, spent 3 days in a flooded trench, restoring vital communications. It was especially hard for women, on whose shoulders lay the main burden of rear-area concerns. They worked in factories, were on duty in hospitals, and extinguished incendiary bombs on rooftops. At the same time, many were mothers of young children, who had to be left in the care of the elderly or neighbors. In kindergartens and nurseries, which continued to operate in building basements, educators organized games and activities to the accompaniment of artillery cannonades. Teenagers also contributed to the city's defense. 14 and 15-year-old boys worked in factories alongside adults, mastering complex professions such as turners, fitters, and assemblers. High school students formed Timirov teams, helping families of frontline soldiers, chopping wood, carrying water, and caring for younger children. Cultural life also continued in besieged Tula. Concerts were held in building basements, featuring professional artists and amateur groups. The city library continued to operate, and its staff delivered books to hospitals and frontline positions. During rare lulls, a brass band played in the city squares, boosting the morale of the defenders. After unsuccessful direct assaults on Tula, Guderian was forced to reconsider his strategy. Frontal attacks on the well-fortified city resulted in significant losses of tanks and personnel, and most importantly, a critical loss of time. By early November, Guderian's tank group found itself in a difficult position. The offensive on Moscow had slowed, and Tula had become an impregnable bastion on the southern flank. In his diary, the German General Oberst recorded, "Tula remains impregnable. It is necessary to change tactics. We will try to bypass the city from the east and cut it off from Moscow." This plan was approved by the Wehrmacht's Supreme Command, and Guderian proceeded to implement it. On November 2, 1941, German motorized units began an outflanking maneuver. The main thrust was directed towards Dedilovo, Stalinogorsk, now Novomoskovsk, Venev. The plan was simple and dangerous. To bypass Tula from the east, cut the Tula-Moscow highway and railway, and create a threat of encirclement for the Tula garrison. The German tank divisions, encountering no serious resistance in this direction, advanced rapidly. On November 3rd, they captured Dedilovo, on the 6th, Stalinogorsk, and on the 7th, Venev. Thus, the enemy reached operational space northeast of Tula and created a real threat of encircling the city. The Soviet command quickly assessed the danger of the situation. The commander of the 50th Army, General Ermakov, reported to the headquarters of the Western Front. The enemy is attempting to envelop Tula from the east and northeast. There is a threat of the city's encirclement. Marshal Zhukov, commanding the Western Front, ordered all available reserves to be urgently transferred to the threatened sector. Units of the 413th Rifle Division, the 239th Rifle Division, and the 107th Tank Division were dispatched to the eastern approaches of Tula. They were to establish a new defensive line along Revyakino, Ivankovo, Malakovo, covering the road to Moscow. Concurrently, mobile detachments were formed in Tula itself to operate on the enemy's flanks. Tula's worker detachments, who knew the local terrain well, played a special role in these countermeasures. They acted like partisans, mining roads, setting ambushes, attacking German communications. On November 8th and 9th, fierce battles unfolded east of Tula. German tank units attempted to break through to the Tula-Moscow highway, but met stubborn resistance. Soviet artillery and tanks counterattacked the enemy, holding back their advance. In these critical days, the defenders of Tula displayed exceptional courage and resilience. Urban battles are always marked by particular cruelty and complexity. The fighting in Tula in the autumn of '41 was no exception, but had its own unique characteristics. The city of arms makers was transformed into a veritable labyrinth of death for German soldiers, where every building became a fortress and every intersection a fire trap. The defenders of Tula masterfully utilized the urban infrastructure. Multi-story buildings were turned into multi-tiered defensive structures. Basements housed ammunition depots and shelters. Ground floors were barricaded and equipped with firing points, while upper floors were occupied by snipers and observers. Underground passages were laid between adjacent buildings, allowing fighters to move unnoticed under shelling. Industrial facilities played a special role in the city's defense. The buildings of the arms and cartridge factories, with their thick brick walls, became impregnable bastions. German tanks attempting to break through factory districts were caught in veritable fire sacks. Narrow passageways between buildings prevented maneuvering, and numerous annexes and technical structures became ideal cover for Soviet anti-tank gunners. The defenders' tactics were based on the fist principle. Mobile assault groups of 15 to 20 men were formed at likely enemy breakthrough points. Such a group typically included a machine gunner, 2 or 3 anti-tank gunners with anti-tank rifles, a submachine gun squad, and fighters with Molotov cocktails. The groups were positioned in key buildings and, upon the appearance of German tanks or infantry, concentrated their fire, creating an effect of surprise and superiority. Snipers became a crucial element of the defense. Tula arms makers, accustomed to precision work, quickly mastered the art of accurate shooting. Sniper pairs were positioned in attics, upper floors, and dilapidated buildings, controlling approaches to key objectives. They were particularly effective against German officers, artillery spotters, and heavy weapon crews. Engineering units developed a system of invisible barricades, disguised anti-tank obstacles that were activated only when enemy equipment approached. Anti-tank hedgehogs were installed on narrow streets, connected by cables to collapsing structures. When a German tank tried to push aside a hedgehog, a mechanism was triggered, and heavy concrete blocks or metal beams fell onto the vehicle. A distinctive feature of the Tula defense was the widespread use of improvised explosive devices. Workers at the arms factories manufactured booby traps, which were placed in basements and on the ground floors of buildings that German soldiers might penetrate. These devices were triggered by pressure or an attempt to open a door, inflicting unexpected casualties on the enemy. The German command, faced with such a defense system, was forced to constantly change tactics. Initial attempts to break into the city center with tanks carrying infantry resulted in heavy losses. The Germans then tried to use massive artillery bombardments, but the defenders quickly learned to take cover in basements and bomb shelters, returning to their positions after the shelling ceased. By mid-November 41, the battles in Tula had taken on the character of a grueling standoff. The Germans controlled some areas on the outskirts, but could not advance deep into the city. The defenders, despite a shortage of ammunition and food, held key objectives and communications. The urban battles in Tula became a school of combat mastery for many Soviet fighters and commanders, who later applied the experience gained in battles for other cities. The arms workers of Tula accomplished a true feat, one that is difficult to overstate. These people lived in two worlds simultaneously. By day, they stood at their machines, creating weapons for the front, and by night, they themselves became soldiers, using in battle what they had made with their own hands. History of warfare had never before seen such unity of front and rear. Ivan Kovalev, a hereditary arms worker with 30 years of experience, worked as a foreman in the assembly section for PPSH submachine guns. When German tanks broke through to the southern outskirts of the city, he, along with a brigade of 12 workers, joined the Tula Workers' Regiment. By day, they fulfilled their production plan, and in the evening, they took up positions in the trenches. In one night of battle, Kovalev's brigade knocked out 2 German tanks with the very anti-tank rifles they had repaired the day before. Sergei Arkhipov, a mechanic at the cartridge factory, led a group for the production of hand grenades. When an aerial bomb hit the workshop, Arkhipov organized the rescue of equipment from under the rubble. Without interrupting production, the workers restored the line in the basement within a day. And 2 days later, Arkhipov himself, with a group of fighters from the Workers' Regiment, used these grenades to repel a German infantry attack on the Voronezh highway. 15-year-old Viktor Klimov, an apprentice turner, mastered the profession in a few weeks and worked on par with adults. Every shift, he overfulfilled his quota by 1.5 to 2 times. In the evenings, Viktor delivered ammunition to the front line, making his way through shelled streets. Once, when a German shell destroyed the house where an observation post was located, the teenager not only delivered cartridges, but also carried a wounded commander out from under fire. Design engineer Nikolai Korovikov created a simplified model of an anti-tank rifle that could be produced from available materials. By day, he supervised the production of this weapon, and by night, he personally tested it in battle, making adjustments to the design. In 2 weeks, under his leadership, more than 200 such rifles were produced, arming the workers' battalions. Women arms workers showed no less courage. Maria Podolskaya, a worker at the cartridge factory, organized a women's frontline brigade. 30 women not only fulfilled their production plan by 150%, but also learned to shoot rifles and machine guns. When a German sabotage group attempted to infiltrate the factory grounds, it was Podolskaya's women's brigade that first engaged in battle and held positions until reinforcements arrived. The connection between production and the front line in Tula was so close that at times the line between worker and fighter blurred. Engineers went to the front line to fix weapon malfunctions on the spot. Commanders of combat units came to the workshops to tell the workers about the combat use of their products, and to express suggestions for design improvements. Veteran arms workers, many of whom remembered World War I, played a special role. Their experience and skill allowed them to find unconventional solutions in critical situations. When there was a shortage of parts for machine guns, Master Pavel Savelyev suggested using components from damaged equipment, developing a technology for restoring and adapting parts. The dual feat of the Tula arms workers was made possible by their unique skills and deep understanding of their craft. They did not just produce weapons, they knew all their features, strengths, and weaknesses, and knew how to use them most effectively. This turned ordinary workers into formidable fighters capable of resisting the professional soldiers of the Wehrmacht. In besieged Tula, the weapons of victory were born. When standard methods of combating enemy tanks proved insufficient, Tula craftsmen displayed astonishing ingenuity. They didn't just produce weapons according to blueprints, they created new designs adapted to the conditions of urban warfare. One of the most striking examples of Tula engineering thought was the modification of the Degtyarev anti-tank rifle. A group of designers, led by engineer Alexander Buligin, developed a lightweight version of the PTR in the shortest possible time, which could be produced from available materials. The new rifle weighed a third less than the standard, yet retained sufficient penetrating power to defeat the side armor of German tanks. In 2 weeks of November, over 300 such rifles were produced. An equally impressive achievement was the creation of makeshift flamethrowers. When supplies of standard flamethrowers ran out, masters at the arms factory adapted oxygen cylinders and parts from fire pumps for this purpose. The resulting weapon, dubbed Tula Dragon by the soldiers, proved extremely effective in street battles. A jet of burning mixture reached 20 meters and could set a tank ablaze or clear an entire building of the enemy. Special attention was paid to improving incendiary bottles. The standard mixture of gasoline and oil was enhanced with the addition of saltpeter and aluminum powder, making it stickier and increasing the burning temperature. Special fuses were developed for the bottles, allowing them to be activated immediately before throwing. This significantly increased safety of use and effectiveness of impact. At the cartridge factory, production of special armor-piercing incendiary cartridges for anti-tank rifles was established. A steel core was inserted into the bullet's head, followed by an incendiary compound. Upon hitting a tank, such a bullet not only pierced the armor, but also caused a fire inside the vehicle. To combat German infantry, Tula gunsmiths created a simplified model of an automatic rifle, unofficially named Tuliak. This was a simple but reliable weapon that could be manufactured even in semi-artisanal conditions. During the siege, about 1,000 such automatic rifles were produced. An important direction of innovative activity was the creation of booby traps. Master gunsmiths developed several types of homemade mines that were placed on likely enemy advance routes. Delayed action mines, which detonated a certain time after German equipment passed, proved particularly effective, disrupting the enemy's rear services. In conditions of artillery shortage, the people of Tula created improvised mortars from large-diameter pipes. These primitive but effective weapons were installed on building roofs and allowed for plunging fire on concentrations of enemy infantry. Behind each such invention were specific people, engineers, masters, workers, who poured not only their knowledge and skills, but also their soul into the weapons. Many of these people, after their shift at the factory, themselves tested the created weapons in battle, and then made improvements to the design. The beginning of December 1941 marked a critical moment in the defense of Tula. The German command, realizing the impossibility of taking the city with frontal assaults, concentrated maximum forces for a decisive storm. Guderian transferred fresh units to Tula, including the elite SS Großdeutschland division and additional tank units from the reserves of Army Group Center. On December 2nd, at 5 in the morning, a powerful artillery barrage began. Hundreds of German guns unleashed thousands of shells on the city's defenders' positions. The shelling lasted 2 hours, after which tanks and infantry went on the attack. The main blow was delivered from the south, along the Oriol Highway, where the enemy concentrated up to 80 tanks supported by 2 infantry regiments. Simultaneously, the Germans attacked from the west and east, striving to dismember the defense and isolate individual pockets of resistance. Luftwaffe aviation continuously bombed the city, attempting to disorganize defense command and suppress firing points. The defenders of Tula met the enemy with organized fire. Artillery batteries, positioned in pre-prepared emplacements, fired direct shots at the advancing tanks. Anti-tank rifle crews allowed armored vehicles to approach within accurate firing range, 100 to 150 meters, and then opened fire on the machine's vulnerable spots. Especially fierce battles unfolded in the Rogozhinsky settlement and Krasny Perekop areas. Here, German tanks managed to penetrate the defense to a depth of up to 1.5 kilometers. A critical situation arose. The enemy could develop success and break through to the city center. At this moment, the Defense Command decided to commit its last reserve into battle, a combined detachment of workers from the arms and cartridge factories who had just returned from their shift. Without rest, straight from their machines, they headed to the front line, armed with anti-tank rifles and bottles with incendiary mixture. A unique event occurred. A group of armory workers under the command of Master Vasily Sokolov attacked the breakthrough German tanks with the very anti-tank rifles they had manufactured a few hours earlier. Their knowledge of the weapon's technical features allowed them to act with maximum effectiveness. In 2 hours of battle, the group knocked out 4 tanks without losing a single man. By the evening of December 2nd, the Germans had been repelled to their initial positions. But this was only the first day of the decisive battle. On December 3rd, the enemy renewed attacks, concentrating their main efforts on the eastern direction. Here, the Germans managed to capture several blocks on the city's outskirts, but further advance was halted by the stubborn resistance of the defenders. On December 4th, the German command made a final attempt to capture Tula. All available reserves were thrown into the attack. Guderian personally directed the operation, understanding that the fate of the entire southern flank of the offensive on Moscow depended on the outcome of this battle. The fighting reached unprecedented ferocity. German tanks broke into the city in small groups of 3 to 5 vehicles, attempting to sow panic and disorganize the defense. But each such group was destroyed by mobile anti-tank detachments of the Tula residents. By the evening of December 4th, it became clear that the enemy's offensive potential was exhausted. German units suffered heavy losses and could not continue attacks with the same intensity. On December 5th, the Soviet counteroffensive near Moscow began, and Guderian was forced to go on the defensive along the entire front. The December battles became the peak of the struggle for Tula. The city held out at the most critical moment, when everything was at stake. The defenders displayed mass heroism, fighting to the last bullet, to the last drop of blood. Many fighters and commanders died, but did not retreat a single step. The outcome of the battle for Tula had strategic significance for the entire Battle of Moscow. The impregnable arms capital tied up significant enemy forces, preventing Guderian from linking up with the group advancing on Moscow from the west. The German command's plans for encircling the capital were thwarted. December 5, 1941, marked a turning point in the history of Tula's defense. On this day, the general counteroffensive of Soviet troops near Moscow began, and the armory capital transformed from a besieged fortress into a springboard for a powerful blow against the enemy. Exhausted in defensive battles, but unbroken in spirit, the city's defenders transitioned from defense to active offensive operations. The command of the Western Front developed a plan in which Tula was assigned a special role. The city was to become the starting point for a strike against the flank and rear of Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army. To accomplish this task, fresh units and formations, including the 112th Tank Division and the 329th Rifle Division, were transferred to the Tula area. The offensive began early in the morning of December 6th. After a short but powerful artillery barrage, Soviet troops attacked the enemy simultaneously in several directions. The main thrust was delivered from the Tula area to the southeast, in the direction of Shchekino and Yasnaya Polyana. Simultaneously, units of the 50th Army attacked German positions south and southwest of the city. The Tula Workers' Regiment, hardened in defensive battles, became one of the shock units of the offensive. Armament workers, who just days before had repelled attacks by German tanks in the streets of their hometown, were now themselves going on the offensive. Their knowledge of the terrain and high morale played an important role in breaking through the German defenses. On the very first day of the offensive, Soviet troops advanced 5 to 7 kilometers, liberating several settlements in the vicinity of Tula. The German command, not expecting such a powerful counterattack, was forced to hastily redeploy reserves to close the gaps in the defense. Tank units were particularly successful. Tank crews of the 112th Division, supported by infantry, broke through the enemy's defenses in the Kosaya Gora area and rushed towards Shchekino. By the end of December 8th, this important communication hub was liberated, creating a threat of encirclement for a large enemy grouping. During the offensive, the experience of urban combat gained during the defense of Tula was actively used. Assault groups, consisting of submachine gunners, sappers, and flamethrower operators, quickly cleared settlements of the enemy, preventing them from entrenching and organizing a defense. Tula's arms factories, which had been operating throughout the siege, now increased their output. Workers toiled around the clock, supplying the advancing units with weapons and ammunition. Tula-made anti-tank rifles proved particularly valuable, effectively engaging German armored vehicles at distances up to 400 meters. By December 12th, Soviet troops advancing from the Tula area had pushed 30 to 40 kilometers, liberating a significant territory of the Tula region. German units, which had recently stormed the city, now found themselves threatened with encirclement and were forced to retreat, abandoning equipment and weapons. Guderian, assessing the critical situation, appealed to Hitler on December 15th, requesting permission for a general retreat of the 2nd Panzer Army. After some hesitation, such permission was granted, and German troops began their withdrawal along the entire front. The offensive from Tula turned into a pursuit of the retreating enemy. The defense of Tula in the autumn of '41 forever entered the heroic annals of the Great Patriotic War. This battle became not just an episode of the Battle of Moscow, but also an independent military historical phenomenon of immense importance for understanding the character of the entire war. Tula, the city of gunsmiths, itself turned into a weapon with which history struck one of the first crushing blows against the myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility. The military strategic significance of Tula's defense is difficult to overestimate. The city became an insurmountable obstacle to Guderian's tank armada heading towards Moscow from the south. By tying up significant enemy forces, the people of Tula prevented the German command from implementing their plan to encircle the capital. The 2nd Panzer Army, considered an elite Wehrmacht formation, suffered a serious defeat for the first time, which undermined the morale of German troops and their belief in the Blitzkrieg. The industrial significance of Tula's defense was also enormous. The preservation of the arms factories allowed for uninterrupted supplies of weaponry to the front during the most critical period of the war. Even under siege, Tula enterprises continued to produce rifles, submachine guns, machine guns, and ammunition, which were immediately sent to the front lines. The unique experience of organizing production in a frontline zone was subsequently used in other regions of the country. But perhaps the most important was the moral significance of the victory near Tula. This was one of the first major defensive operations that ended in success for Soviet troops. after a series of retreats and defeats in the summer-autumn of '41. The defense of Tula demonstrated that the Wehrmacht could be stopped and defeated. The news that workers and militiamen were able to stop Guderian's tanks spread like lightning throughout the country, inspiring the defenders of other cities. The special significance of Tula's defense is given by the fact that not only regular troops but also the civilian population participated in it. The Tula Workers' Regiment became a symbol of popular resistance, an example of how ordinary people, workers, engineers, employees, can turn into a formidable military force when it comes to defending their hometown. After the war, the feat of the defenders of Tula was immortalized in numerous monuments, memorials, and museum exhibitions. On December 7, 1966, by a decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, the city was awarded the Order of Lenin for the courage and steadfastness shown by the defenders of Tula, and for their contribution to the defeat of the German fascist invaders. In modern Russia, the memory of Tula's defense is carefully preserved. Commemorative events, battle reenactments, and meetings with veterans are held annually. Schools and universities in the city regularly hold lessons of courage dedicated to the heroic pages of the history of their native land. The defense of Tula has become an integral part of the historical consciousness of Russians, an example of steadfastness, courage, and popular unity in the face of mortal danger.